I wasn't supposed to be out there that night. The weather had shifted sometime after sunset, the kind of shift you feel in your skin before you even notice it with your eyes. The air grew heavy, damp, like it had soaked up every ounce of moisture from the ground, and the fog rolled in thick and low. It wasn't the thin, cinematic kind that drifts prettily over the grass. It was dense, swallowing the trees whole, smothering the light from my flashlight so it barely reached a few feet ahead. I'd taken that trail countless times before, a narrow path through a strip of woods just outside of town, the kind that feels safe in daylight because you can still hear traffic in the distance. But that night, the world felt sealed off. Even the hum of cars on the main road was gone. No wind, no animals. Just silence so total it pressed on my ears until I could hear the faint rustle of my own clothes. I'd been walking for maybe 15 minutes when I noticed something strange about the clearing ahead. It wasn't unusual for mist to settle there. I'd seen it a dozen times. But this fog seemed to pool, swirling as if it had weight. And through that haze, I saw it. A phone. Not a cell phone, not even a cordless one, but an old black rotary phone, the kind you'd see in your grandparents' hallway. It sat there in the dead center of the clearing, its cord trailing into the dirt like it had grown out of the earth itself. I froze, more confused than afraid at first, my mind scrambling for a reason it could be there. A prank maybe? Some art project? Then it rang. The sound tore through the silence. Deep, resonant, nothing like the muted trill I remembered from those old phones. Each chime seemed to reverberate in the fog, vibrating in my chest like someone had plucked a wire strung through my bones. I don't know why, but it made my stomach drop. It rang again, and again. I told myself not to get closer. I told myself to turn around and leave it alone. But with each ring, I felt an almost physical pull forward, like I'd already decided to answer before my feet even started moving. The closer I stepped toward it, the heavier the air became. It was as if the fog wasn't just water vapor, but something thicker, pressing against my skin, slowing me down. My breath felt shallow, each inhale tasting faintly metallic, like the air inside an old basement. The phone rang again, a perfect, unwavering rhythm, 4 seconds between each chime. It was so steady that it felt wrong, mechanical in a way that didn't belong out here. I reached the edge of the clearing and paused, my flashlight beam cutting through the whiteness just enough to make the phone's glossy surface glint. The cord was still disappearing into the dirt, no sign of where it ended. Another ring. I crouched down, half expecting to see it plugged into some hidden outlet, but the cord simply vanished into the earth as if the ground had swallowed it decades ago. Then I noticed something stranger. The sound of the ringing wasn't just coming from the phone. It was around me, behind me, above me, inside my own ears. Like the fog itself was carrying the noise, bending it, feeding it back in an echo that didn't feel natural. I should have left. I knew I should have left. But my hand was already reaching for the receiver. The surface was cold, not the kind of cold from the night air, but a deep internal chill, as if it hadn't been touched in years. The moment I lifted it to my ear, the ringing stopped. For a few seconds there was only silence. Then, breathing. Slow, steady, and wet. Not the hiss of static you get from a bad connection, but the kind of sound you hear when someone is inches from your face, exhaling through their mouth. I swallowed hard, my voice shaking when I said, No answer. The breathing continued, followed by the faintest sound, something dragging, maybe fabric or rope, scraping across a hard surface. It went on for several seconds before I heard something else, a whisper, too low to make out, like words caught on the edge of hearing. Then the line went dead, and the phone, impossibly, began to ring again in my hand. I dropped the receiver like it had burned me. It swung from its cord, twisting slowly, creaking in a way that made the fog feel heavier. I backed away, my boots crunching against damp leaves, but the sound of the ringing followed me, not from the phone in the clearing anymore, but from somewhere closer. It was inside my head. Every chime felt like a nail being driven into my skull. My hands flew to my ears, but it didn't help. The noise wasn't going in, it was already in. The more I tried to block it, the louder it became. I don't remember turning to run, but suddenly I was pushing through the fog, the clearing behind me disappearing like it had never existed. My flashlight beam jittered across tree trunks, catching bits of mist that swirled unnaturally, as though disturbed by something moving just out of sight. The ringing slowed, then stopped. By the time I stumbled out of the woods and onto the road, my lungs were burning. I stood there, bent over, trying to convince myself it had just been some elaborate prank, maybe a phone hooked up to a hidden speaker. But no one was out there, no footsteps behind me, no laughter, just the distant croak of a night frog, like the world had finally remembered how to make sound again. When I got home, my apartment felt different. Still, yes, but too still. Like the air hadn't been touched since I left. I locked the door, double-checked the windows, and turned on every light I could. It helped for maybe 10 minutes. Then my phone rang. The sound was ordinary, familiar, my own ringtone. But the number was blank, not unknown caller, not even a string of zeros. Just nothing. I didn't answer. The ringing stopped on its own, but my phone's screen stayed lit for a moment longer than it should have, as if someone was still on the other end waiting. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that when I picked up that receiver in the clearing, I didn't just answer a phone. I answered something else, and whatever it was, it knows my number now. The calls didn't start right away. For 2 nights after the clearing, I slept with my phone on silent, screen face down, buried under a pillow. It wasn't just paranoia. It was a way to pretend the whole thing had been some late-night hallucination, a trick my brain had played on me in the fog. By the 3rd night, I convinced myself I was being ridiculous. I put my phone back on the nightstand, volume on, the way I always had. It rang at 1:07 a.m. The sound jolted me awake so fast my chest ached. My room was black except for the dim red digits of the alarm clock. My phone screen glowed with that same empty number, a blank space where the caller ID should have been. I didn't answer. It stopped after 3 rings, leaving me in a silence so sharp it felt like the world was holding its breath. I lay there, heart pounding, waiting for it to start again. It didn't. I eventually drifted into a thin, uneasy sleep. The next night, the call came earlier, 12:41 a.m., and it rang for longer, 10 rings this time. Each one seemed to stretch, just a fraction longer than the last, as though whoever, or whatever, was on the other end was getting more patient. By the 5th night, I picked up. I told myself I needed proof. Maybe I'd record it, send it to someone, finally have something solid to show I wasn't imagining things. But when I brought the phone to my ear, I didn't get breathing this time. I got attic. Not normal static. This was thick, layered, textured, like standing too close to a waterfall, the hiss vibrating in my teeth. Beneath it, I could almost make out patterns, shapes of sound, like a language spoken from underwater. And then, my name. It was faint, stretched, as if someone had pulled it apart syllable by syllable. Not shouted, not whispered, just stated, like they were confirming it. I froze, unable to respond. The static swelled, louder, until I felt my jaw aching. Then the line went dead. I stayed awake until sunrise, phone clutched in my hand, convinced that if I closed my eyes, the next sound I'd hear would be that voice. Closer. The following night, I didn't wait for the call. I sat on the couch with the lights dimmed, phone in hand, my thumb hovering over the record button on the voice memo app. My apartment felt different now. The kind of difference you can't point to, like walking into a room after someone's been there and left without touching anything. At 12:19 a.m., it rang. This time there was no hesitation. I hit record and answered. The static was immediate, thicker than before. It surged in and out, almost in rhythm, like ocean waves. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, straining to hear beneath it, and that's when the voice came. Not one voice, many. They were faint at first, overlapping, tangled together so tightly I couldn't pick out individual words. But slowly they separated, like strands being pulled apart, and I realized I recognized some of them. My mother's voice, my old high school friends, my own. Hearing your own voice when you haven't spoken is wrong in a way that's hard to describe. It wasn't just mimicking me. It was me. Same tone, same breath pattern. The only difference was the way it stretched my words, drawing them out too long, as if savoring each syllable. They all said the same thing. Don't pee. Pick up next time. It wasn't a plea, it was a warning. The static surged again, drowning everything out. Then the voices returned, but this time they were saying things I hadn't told anyone. Things I couldn't have told anyone. Childhood secrets. Moments I thought about in shame but never spoke aloud. Even memories I had forgotten until I heard them being recited back to me in those familiar tones. I dropped the phone. It clattered onto the carpet, but the call didn't end. The voices kept spilling out, louder, faster, until it felt like the air in the room was vibrating with them. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The screen went black. No missed call, no audio file in my recorder, like it had never happened. I sat there shaking and realized something I hadn't before. Whoever was calling didn't just know me. They'd been listening for a very long time. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard my own voice from the call, repeating that single phrase over and over. Don't pick up next time. It didn't feel like a warning anymore. It felt like a threat disguised as one. I kept replaying it in my head, trying to convince myself it was some kind of elaborate prank. A soundboard, maybe? Someone scraping my social media for clips and piecing them together? But there were things said in that call that I know I've never recorded, never told a soul. By sunrise, my thoughts were spiraling. I started checking my apartment like it was a crime scene, looking for hidden cameras, recording devices, anything that could explain how those voices knew so much. I tore apart my living room, moved furniture, even climbed onto a chair to check the smoke detector for bugs. Nothing. I told myself I wouldn't answer again no matter what, but the problem with fear is that it changes shape. The first few nights I was afraid of picking up. I was afraid of not picking up, afraid of what might happen if I ignored it. That night, the call didn't come. Not at midnight, not at 1, not at all, and somehow that was worse. The absence of it was a void, an itch in my brain I couldn't scratch. I found myself staring at my phone, willing it to ring, just so I'd know they were still there, that I hadn't been abandoned to some quiet that felt heavier than noise. By the third day without a call, I was jumpy. Every sound in my apartment seemed too loud, the hum of the fridge, the ticking of the wall clock, even my own breathing. I caught myself glancing at the corner of the room where I'd been sitting when I answered last time, half expecting to see something standing there. I thought I wanted it to stop. I was wrong, because when you've heard voices like that, silence doesn't feel safe. It feels like waiting. And I knew deep down the next time my phone rang, I wouldn't be able to resist answering. By the time the calls started again, I had convinced myself to involve someone else. It wasn't an easy decision. There's a certain kind of humiliation in explaining something you don't fully understand, like you're inviting someone to look inside your head and see the mess for themselves. But the silence had dragged on long enough to gnaw at me, and when the ringing finally returned, I didn't answer. Instead, I called Ryan. He's been my friend since high school, the kind of person who never lets anything rattle him. I figured if anyone could help me figure this out, it would be him. When I told him about the fog, the phone in the clearing, the blank number calls, and the voices, he laughed at first, but the more I talked, the quieter he got. "All right," he said finally. "Next time it rings, I'll be there. We'll figure it out." So 2 nights later, we sat in my living room. The lights were off, save for the dim blue glow from my TV, and my phone was on the coffee table between us. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips just looking at it. At 12:46 a.m. it rang. Ryan grinned, picked it up, and mouthed, "I got this." He pressed the phone to his ear. At first, his face was neutral, just listening. Then the expression shifted, not to fear exactly, but something sharper. His eyebrows knit together, his eyes darting to me, and he mouthed something I couldn't read. "Who is this?" he asked into the receiver. The way his voice cracked on the last word made my stomach twist. He listened for another few seconds, then jerked the phone away like it had shocked him. Without a word, he tossed it onto the couch, stood up, and headed for the door. "Ryan?" I said, following him. "What did they say?" He didn't answer. He just left. I didn't see him again for 3 days. When he finally called, his voice was flat, almost mechanical. "Don't ever put me on that call again." Then he hung up. I didn't sleep the night Ryan walked out. It wasn't just the way he left, it was the look in his eyes. I've known him for years, and I've seen him angry, scared, drunk, even on the verge of tears once or twice. But this was different. It was as if, in the short time he'd been on that call, something had scraped away at him, leaving just enough to function but not enough to explain what happened. I called him twice that night. No answer. The next day I texted him. "What did you hear?" No reply. By the second day I'd given up on him telling me, but late that evening my phone buzzed with a single text from him. "It wasn't for you." I stared at those words for a long time, trying to decode them. Before I could respond, the phone rang. Same blank number. My thumb hovered over the screen, but Ryan's voice, the memory of it, echoed in my head. "Don't ever put me on that call again," I answered anyway. Static. Then, not one voice, but 2. They spoke in perfect unison, low and deliberate. I couldn't understand the words. They sounded like they were being pulled backwards, syllables folding into each other, but the rhythm was hypnotic, almost soothing, until I realized the voices were different. One was mine, the other was Ryan's. The longer I listened, the more I recognized details, the cadence of his speech, the way he breathes before finishing a sentence. But the words were wrong, and even without understanding them, I knew they weren't speaking to me. They were speaking about me. The static swelled, swallowing the voices, and for a moment I thought the call was ending. But then, layered under the hiss, I heard something else. Faint, distant, yet unmistakable. Footsteps. Not in my apartment, not anywhere near, but moving toward wherever those voices were coming from. The call cut out. My reflection in the dark phone screen looked paler than I'd ever seen it, and for the first time since this started, I realized something that chilled me more than the calls themselves. Whoever was on the other end wasn't just calling. They were coming closer. I didn't move for a long time after that call ended. The footsteps I'd heard, faint, steady, looped in my mind like a stuck track. They hadn't been hurried, not threatening in the obvious sense. They'd been deliberate, purposeful, as if whoever or whatever was making them already knew where they were going. And they weren't in a rush to get there. I kept telling myself they couldn't have been real, that they were just a trick of the static, my brain turning random noise into patterns. But deep down, I didn't believe it. The sound had weight, direction. It was happening somewhere. By morning, my apartment felt like a different place entirely. I kept checking the locks, glancing toward the windows, expecting to see a figure standing there in the fog. I even thought about leaving, just packing a bag and driving anywhere. But that idea fizzled as quickly as it came. I knew somehow it wouldn't matter. If they could reach me here, they could reach me anywhere. On the fourth day, Ryan finally called again. His voice was quieter this time, like he was speaking from far away. "They know your name," he said. I asked him what that meant. Silence, then the click of the line disconnecting. That night, I kept my phone turned off, battery pulled. I thought it might give me some relief, but instead the silence just got heavier, almost pressing against my chest. Every creak of the building, every hum of the pipes made me tense. I slept for maybe an hour before I woke to something worse than a ringing phone. Knocking. Not loud, just 3 soft, measured taps against my front door. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The knocks didn't come again. When I finally worked up the nerve to look through the peephole, there was nothing but the dim, empty hallway. But the air smelled faintly of damp leaves, and somewhere, so far away it could have been in my head, I thought I heard the slow, steady ring of that phone in the clearing. It was the first time I truly understood the calls were only part of it. They were just the way in. I thought I could avoid it. After that night, the knocking, the smell of damp leaves, I decided the safest thing I could do was ignore it all. No calls, no answering the door, no walking into places I didn't recognize. I told myself if I didn't engage, it couldn't get worse. For a while it worked, or at least I convinced myself it did. The days blurred into each other, quiet and uneventful, but the silence had changed. It wasn't the normal kind. It was the kind that waits. The first crack in that fragile piece came 3 weeks later. I woke night to the faint sound of my phone ringing, even though it was still powered off in the drawer. The sound was muffled, like it was coming from the other side of the wall. I didn't move. I just lay there, listening, until it stopped. But the next morning, when I opened my curtains, I froze. There was mud on the glass. Not splattered, smeared, like someone had pressed their palm flat against it and dragged their fingers down. The streaks looked almost like writing, but not in any language I knew. That was the first time I thought about the clearing in weeks, and the second I did, the memory came back sharper than I wanted. The heavy mist, the phone on the stump, the strange way the air had felt too thick to breathe. I hadn't realized until that moment how much I'd been holding it back. The next day, I couldn't help myself. I started looking up that area on maps, even though I didn't know exactly where it was. No matter how far I zoomed or which satellite images I checked, there was always a gap, a patch of blurred land that didn't belong. That night, I dreamed about it again. I was back in the clearing, but it wasn't the same. The phone was still there, but this time it was ringing before I even touched it. I didn't want to answer, but my hands moved on their own. When I lifted the receiver, the voice on the other end didn't belong to Ryan. It belonged to me. Hearing my own voice on the line didn't make sense. It wasn't like listening to a recording. It was alive, breathing, reacting to me. There was a faint echo, as if the other me was standing in a cavern. "Don't," it began, but the word dissolved into static before I could hear the rest. I gripped the phone harder, my heartbeat loud enough to drown out everything. "Who are you?" I demanded, though I already knew the answer in some deep animal part of me. The voice came back, sharper now. "Stop trying to leave." Then something shifted. It was like the trees leaned closer, their branches knitting together overhead. The clearing darkened even though no clouds passed. Over the moon. My breath felt heavier, harder to take in, as if the air was thicker than water. When I looked down, the cord of the phone was no longer attached to the stump. It was running across the ground into the trees. Something was pulling on it from the shadows. The voice, my voice, spoke again, this time in a low whisper. "You already stayed too long. Now it knows." Before I could ask what it meant, the cord jerked violently, yanking the phone from my hand. It slithered into the darkness like a snake being reeled in. I stumbled back, my foot catching on a root. That's when I noticed the ground beneath me wasn't moss anymore. It was soft, spongy, and warm. I looked down. The earth was breathing. A deep inhale swelled the ground, lifting me slightly, followed by a long exhale that carried a faint, rancid odor, the same damp leaf smell from weeks ago. The whisper in my head wasn't coming from the phone anymore. It was inside me now, curling through my thoughts like smoke. "You can go," it said, "but something will follow." The trees began to split, a narrow path forming through the dark. I didn't want to take it, but the ground's breathing grew faster, more urgent, until I had no choice but to move. The moment I stepped off the breathing earth, the forest went silent, completely silent. And then from somewhere deep behind me, I heard the sound of my own footstep, still walking. I didn't turn around. Whatever was walking behind me, whatever wore my footsteps like a second skin, I knew I couldn't face it. My grandmother once told me that some things only become real when you look at them, and in that moment, I believed her. The path ahead was unnaturally straight, as if the forest had cut it for me on purpose. My phone was still in my pocket, but the screen was dead. No matter how hard I pressed the buttons, it wouldn't light up. The only so. And was the faint crunch of leaves under my own feet, and the quieter, more deliberate echo behind me. Halfway down the path, I caught something out of the corner of my eye, movement between the trees. Not shapes exactly, more like gaps in reality, pieces of the world that didn't align with the rest. They pulsed faintly, like the breathing ground I'd just escaped. When the path ended, I found myself back at the edge of town. The streetlights hummed faintly, and I could see my apartment building a block away. Relief should have hit me, but instead, there was a hollowness in my chest, as if I'd left something behind, or something had come with me. Inside my apartment, everything looked the same, but the air felt heavier. I went straight to the bathroom mirror, needing to see my own face, to reassure myself I was still me. I froze. The reflection smiled first. It was subtle, just a twitch at the corners of the mouth. But I wasn't smiling. My breath caught, and in that instant, the bathroom light flickered. When it came back, the reflection was normal again, matching me perfectly. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the faintest sound. Not inside my apartment, but somewhere just outside. Footsteps on the pavement. They would pause for minutes at a time, then start again, always stopping just before my door. It's been 3 days since the clearing, and I haven't gone outside. I've stopped checking the mirror as often. I'm afraid one day soon I'll see that smile again. And this time, it won't be in the reflection. It will be standing right behind me. It started with the static. At first I thought it was just a bad signal. My TV had been fine the night before, but when I switched it on that morning, every channel dissolved into a haze of crawling white noise. No sound, no image. Just static that seemed too alive. I tried turning it off and on again. The screen stayed black for a heartbeat longer than it should have. Then the static came, bah, ach, but this time it pulsed, like it was breathing. I told myself it was the cable company's fault, but when I pulled the plug entirely, the static didn't go away. The TV wasn't even on anymore. I backed up slowly, my breath catching in my throat. The screen was pitch black now, but something faint was moving across it, like the silhouette of a person standing far away in heavy snow. I couldn't make out features, only the vague outline of a head and shoulders. The shape stayed there all day. That night, I left the living room light on and went to bed, telling myself it would be gone by morning. But at 3:12 a.m., the sound woke me. A low, crackling hum, like the hiss you hear when a radio's caught between stations. It wasn't coming from the TV anymore. It was coming from the hallway. I sat up, my chest tightening, and listened. The hum grew louder, then stopped completely. The silence that followed felt wrong, Too thick, too expectant. I waited, barely breathing, and then heard it. One slow footstep, then another. They stopped just outside my bedroom door. I didn't open it. For the rest of the night, I lay there frozen, every muscle screaming to move, but unable to even blink too fast. Eventually, exhaustion took me, and I woke with the sunlight spilling across my floor. The TV was still off, but the static had returned, and now the silhouette was closer. By the third day, I stopped pretending it was a glitch. The silhouette on the TV was no longer faint. It had definition now. Shoulders too broad, head tilted slightly forward, as though watching me through the glass. Its shape didn't flicker with the static anymore. Instead, the static seemed to cling to it, swirling in slow, unnatural currents like moths drawn to a flame. I tried to avoid looking at it, but every time I passed through the living room, my eyes were pulled toward it, like it knit. Why was there? That night the sound returned, not just the hum but a distorted whisper buried in the crackle, like someone trying to speak through a storm. I couldn't make out the words at first, but as I stood in the doorway, frozen, the voice sharpened. Closer. My breath hitched. The figure moved for the first time. It leaned forward, and the static hiss deepened, pressing against my eardrums. My vision swam, and I stumbled back. That's when the whisper came again, louder this time, not from the TV, but from directly behind me. Let me in. I spun around, heart pounding. No one was there. When I turned back, the figure was gone. The screen went completely black, and for a heartbeat I felt relief. But then, reflected in that glossy black glass, I saw something that froze my blood. Not the living room behind me, but a different room entirely. A dark, windowless space lit by the faint glow of static. And in that space, the figure stood. Except now, it wasn't just a silhouette. It had a face. The features were distorted, as if stretched and pulled in directions a human skull should never go. Its eyes were the deepest voids I had ever seen, and yet I knew it was looking directly at me. My knees went weak. I grabbed the remote, desperate, and slammed the power button. Nothing happened. I pulled the plug from the wall. The image didn't disappear. The figure tilted its head the other way now, like it was studying me. And then, as my vision blurred and the room seemed to tilt around me, it smiled, wide, jagged, and wrong. That was the last thing I remember before everything went black. When I woke, the TV was off. At first I thought maybe it had been a dream, that I'd collapsed from exhaustion and imagined the whole thing, but then I noticed the smell. The air reeked of burnt dust and something metallic like blood left too long in the heat, the carpet beneath. My hands was damp, though I couldn't see any spill or leak. I rubbed my palms on my jeans and froze when I saw the faint black smears left behind, as if I'd been handling soot. The TV screen was cold now, but when I looked into it, there was still no reflection of my living room. Only darkness, a depthless black that seemed to swallow the light around it. That's when I heard it. Not the whisper this time, but breathing. It was slow, deliberate, and close. So close it felt like the warm exhale brushed my neck. My stomach turned to ice. I didn't dare move, afraid that if I turned around I'd see that stretched, smiling face inches from mine. I ran. I didn't grab my phone, wallet, or even shoes. I bolted out the front door, down the street, not stopping until my lungs burned. I spent the rest of the night in my car, parked 2 blocks away, watching my apartment windows from a distance. At 3:14 a.m., the light in the living room came on. I wasn't there to turn it on. And in that pale glow, just barely visible through the curtains, was a silhouette. It stood perfectly still, head tilted as though looking for me. By morning, the figure was gone. I went back inside only to grab essentials, but even then the static clung to the silence. My phone screen glitched when I tried to call for help, and the mirrors in my apartment no longer showed my reflection clearly, just a faint, lingering haze. I moved out that day. The TV stayed behind. I couldn't risk touching it. But sometimes when I pass by electronics stores or flick through channels late at night, I swear I see it, just for a second, in the corner of the screen, watching, waiting, and every time the static hums, almost like it's whispering my name. I thought I'd left it all behind. The night I fled this town, I swore I'd never walk its cracked sidewalks again, never breathe the damp air that clung to every memory like mold on old wallpaper. But here I am, standing in front of the same sagging fence, staring at the house I once called home, feeling that same weight pressing against my chest. The weight of being watched. The Watcher. That's what I called him when I was a kid. Back then, it sounded almost like a childish ghost story. Now, it feels like a curse. He wasn't a man, he wasn't anything I could explain, but he was there, always there. A figure at the edge of my vision, just beyond the safe glow of the streetlights, a shadow that moved when shadows shouldn't. It started again the moment I stepped back into town. At first it was small things, the reflection in the shop window that didn't match my movements, the faint sound of breathing when I walked down empty streets, a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye vanishing when I turned my head. Then came the notes. Slipped under the door of my motel room, just a single line, handwritten in neat block letters. "You're back. I never left." My stomach turned cold when I read it. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old building's walls felt like footsteps. Every hum of the streetlights sounded like someone whispering my name. I tried to convince myself it was paranoia, just the old trauma playing tricks on me. But the next morning I found something outside my door. Not a note this time. It was a Polaroid photograph. Blurry, grainy, but unmistakable. It was me, standing in front of the motel's vending machine, my back turned. The timestamp said it was taken at 3:17 a.m. At that time, I'd been awake, sitting on my bed staring at the door. Now I feel it again, that familiar cold crawling up my spine. There's someone outside, just past the window, in the shadows of the parking lot. I can't see him, but I know he's there, watching, always watching. I thought I escaped him. I was wrong. I didn't move for hours. I just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at that thin wooden door, the only thing separating me from the figure outside. I kept telling myself I'd imagined it, that the darkness had a way of shaping itself into threats when you stared too long, but deep down, I knew better. At some point, exhaustion must have taken me, because the next thing I remember is waking to a soft, deliberate knock. Not the hurried knock of someone in need. No, this was slow, rhythmic, like a code. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more. I didn't answer. My hands were gripping the bedsheet so tightly my knuckles ached. My breath sounded too loud in the small room, so I tried to hold it. Silence followed. I thought maybe he'd left. Then I saw it. From under the gap in the door, movement, a shadow, bending down. Then something slid into the room, another Polaroid. This one was different. It was closer, too close. My own face taken through the thin curtain of the motel window. My eyes were closed, my head tilted slightly like I was sleeping. The timestamp read 3:17 a.m. again. My throat went dry. I had been awake at that time. I remembered staring at the door. I remembered not blinking, barely breathing. But in the photo, my eyes were shut, my lips were parted as if I'd been in the middle of whispering something. I dropped the picture. It landed face up on the floor, those empty eyes staring back at me. And then, another sound. This one wasn't from the door. It was from inside the room, a soft, low creak, the sound of a floorboard giving way under someone's weight. I turned slowly toward the corner by the wardrobe. My pulse pounded so hard it hurt. There was nothing there, just shadows pooling like thick oil, swallowing the edges of the cheap floral wallpaper. But the air felt wrong, heavier, colder, like the oxygen itself was being pulled out of the room. That's when I heard it, a whisper, right next to my ear. So close I could feel the warm breath against my skin. "You close your eyes more than you think." I didn't scream. I couldn't. The words still echoed in my skull like a bell after it struck. "You close your eyes more than you think." It wasn't just what was said. It was the way it was said. Playful, patient, like he'd been watching long enough to know my smallest habits. I spun around, but the room was exactly as it had been. The curtains hung still. The wardrobe door was shut. The desk chair sat empty. But the feeling of someone standing just behind me lingered, clinging to my skin. My first thought was to get out. Now. I shoved my shoes on without tying them and grabbed my bag. The second I unlocked the door, the hallway light flickered. Once. Twice. Then the entire place fell into darkness. I froze in the doorway. I could barely make out the narrow hallway stretching left and right, doors lined like teeth. Somewhere in that darkness, footsteps began. Slow, deliberate, heel to toe, pacing closer. I backed into my room, fumbling for the lamp, but the switch did nothing. My phone was dead, though I'd left it charging. That detail lodged in my mind like a splinter. I knew I had plugged it in. The footsteps stopped just outside my door. No knock this time, just silence. Then, in one smooth motion, the doorknob turned. Not rattled, not forced, just turned, as if someone knew they could walk in whenever they liked. The lock held. I stumbled back, clutching the nearest thing I could find. The motel's Bible from the bedside table. My hand shook so badly I could barely hold it. Then the handle slowly returned to its resting position. The footsteps moved away, each step fading into the distance until there was nothing. I thought it was over. I thought maybe they'd given up. But when I dared to inch forward and look through the peephole, my stomach dropped. The hallway wasn't empty. Every door on both sides was now wide open, every room yawning black inside as if the motel had been hollowed out in an instant, and at the very end of the hallway, barely visible in the gloom, a figure stood perfectly still, head tilted, holding a Polaroid camera at chest level. I didn't move. My body wasn't mine anymore. It felt like every muscle had been replaced with ice. The figure at the end of the hall didn't take a step, didn't make a sound. The only movement was the faint twitch of their fingers around the camera, like they were waiting for me to give them a reason to press the shutter. I blinked. That was my first mistake. The click whir of the Polaroid cut through the stillness, and a square of glossy paper slid from the camera's mouth. The figure didn't even look at it, just let it fall to the floor. That sound, mechanical, deliberate, echoed down the hall and somehow felt louder than my own heartbeat. I don't remember deciding to move, but I found myself backing into my room, closing the door slowly, trying not to let the latch make a sound. My mind kept snagging on questions I didn't want answers to. Why open every door? Why take the photo? Who was in it? I pressed my ear to the door, straining for any sound. At first there was nothing. Then, the faintest shuffle, a slow, dragging step. Not toward me, not away, just pacing, waiting. When I finally dared to peek again, the figure was gone. The hallway was empty. The Polaroid was still lying on the floor, just outside my door. I knew I shouldn't touch it. I knew it. But something about that small white square pulled at me, the way you can't help staring at a wound even though it makes you sick. I opened the door just enough to reach out and snatch it. The photograph developed in my hands. My mouth went dry. It was my room, from above, like the angle you'd see if you were pressed flat against the ceiling, staring straight down, and there I was, sitting on the edge of the bed, looking toward the door. Only, I hadn't been looking toward the door at the time the picture was taken. My breath caught. Behind me in the photo there was something else. Not quite a person, more like a shape, a smear of shadow darker than the rest of the room bending over my shoulder. The Polaroid was still warm, like it had just been printed seconds before. I dropped it, but when it hit the carpet, it wasn't a photo anymore. It was blank. The blank square of Polaroid lay face up on the carpet, taunting me with its sudden emptiness. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. I wanted to believe it was just my mind twisting things, that the shadow in the photo had been nothing but a trick of the light. But deep down, I knew better. I shut the door again, this time pressing my entire weight against it, feeling the wood vibrate faintly as if the house itself was breathing. The air inside my room was different now, heavier, like the oxygen had been swapped with something denser. Something you had to drag into your lungs. My ears rang, and in the distance, a faint click broke through. Not the Polaroid. Not this time. This was the sound of my doorknob shifting. I froze. The knob turned a fraction, then stopped. A soft metallic rattle followed, as though someone was testing the lock even though there wasn't one. I pressed my palm against it, holding it still. That's when the door pushed back. Not hard. Not like someone trying to force their way in, but slow. Deliberate. Like a hand on the other side was measuring my resistance. I leaned in with all my weight, but it didn't stop. The pressure increased, almost curious, almost playful. I whispered to myself, "Go away, go away, go away." But whoever, whatever, was there didn't listen. The push stopped suddenly. Silence. Then from the floor level a shadow slid under the gap between the door and the carpet. It wasn't a trick of the light. It had depth, movement. The edges curled and pulsed like smoke, but it never dissipated. It crept further in, reaching toward my feet. I stumbled backward, heart hammering. The shadow froze. Then the doorknob clicked again, this time turning all the way. The door creaked open an inch. No resistance now. A sliver of the hallway spilled into my room, but it wasn't the warm yellow of the hall light I expected. It was a dim, washed-out gray, like light filtered through storm clouds. Something stood in that gray. Tall, motionless, its head tilted slightly as if trying to listen to my thoughts, and in its hand, dangling at its side, was the Polaroid camera. The smell of old chemicals and something rotten drifted in. The door kept opening. The door didn't swing open all at once. It moved with the patience of something that knew I had nowhere else to run. The gray light seeped further in, draining the color from my walls, my hands, even the clothes on my body. The figure remained in the threshold, still as a photograph. Its skin, or what I thought was skin, looked like paper left out in the rain, warped and blistered. Its head was cocked, that same tilt that made it seem less like curiosity and more like calculation. The Polaroid camera in its hand looked older than mine. Its metal edges dented, the lens cracked. It dangled it loosely, swinging it back and forth, the way a child might play with a toy they're about to break. I wanted to speak, to demand it leave, but my throat locked up. My mind kept looping one thought. Don't let it in. The problem was, it already had 1 foot over the threshold. When it stepped inside, the temperature dropped instantly. My breath fogged in the air, and I swear the carpet beneath its feet darkened, soaking up some invisible moisture. The figure didn't walk normally. It glided like it wasn't quite touching the floor. Then it lifted the camera to its face. The sound of the shutter clicking was louder than it should have been, like a gunshot. The flash didn't blind me. It did something worse. The room wasn't my room anymore. In the blink after the flash, the furniture was gone. The walls were peeling, the ceiling sagged with water damage, and the air smelled of mildew and wet stone. My bed frame was nothing but rusted metal. The floorboards beneath the carpet groaned like they hadn't been stepped on in decades. The figure was still there, lowering the camera. But now, its head wasn't tilted. It was looking straight at me. Its face, or the place a face should have been, was empty. Not blank. Empty. Hollow, like looking into a tunnel with no end. A second click. This time the flash burned cold against my skin. My chest constricted. It felt like my ribs were closing in around my heart. I couldn't move. When the light faded, I wasn't standing anymore. I was sitting. My wrists were bound with something coarse and wet. The figure was closer now, close enough that I could hear the faint crackle of its skin every time it shifted. The camera came up again. The third picture was for me. I woke up to the sound of paper sliding across the floor. My first thought was that I had dreamt everything. The gray figure, the flash, the way the room had rotted around me. But when I sat up, the air still felt heavy, damp. My clothes were clinging to my skin like I'd been standing in fog all night. Another whisper of paper against wood. I looked toward my bedroom door. They were photographs, dozens of them. Each one had been slid under the gap at the bottom of the door, one after another, as if someone or something was standing outside feeding them to me. I hesitated before picking one up. The first photo was of me, sleeping. The timestamp in the corner read 3:41 a.m. My head was turned toward the wall, my blanket pulled to my shoulders. But the angle, it was taken from inside the room, standing where my wardrobe was. I turned to look. The wardrobe doors were shut, but I didn't remember shutting them last night. The second photo made my hands tremble. It showed me sitting on the bed, looking at the first photo. But this wasn't right. This was happening now. The angle was from just behind me, like something was crouched inches away. I spun around. Nothing. I kept picking them up, one after another, my breath growing faster with each one. One showed me standing in the kitchen, another, me in the hallway, another, me staring out the window at the yard. None of these had happened yet, but they were all time-stamped within the next few hours. The last one stopped me cold. It was black and white, the grain heavier than the others, like it was older. I was in it, but barely. My figure was slumped in a chair, head hanging forward, hair covering my face, and standing behind me was the gray figure, its head tilted again, holding the camera directly above my shoulder. The timestamp read 5 o'clock a.m. I looked at the clock. It was 4:17. A soft creak came from the hallway. Something was moving toward my room, slow and deliberate. I shoved the photos under my pillow like hiding them could change what they showed. My heart hammered in my throat as the footsteps stopped outside my door. Then, silence, until the camera clicked. The click echoed in the silence, sharp and deliberate. I froze, my back pressed against the headboard. The sound hadn't come from inside my room. It was outside the door. But the way it lingered, like a nail dragging across glass, made me feel as if it had seeped into the walls. Slowly, I reached under my pillow and pulled out the last photograph, the one marked 5 o'clock a.m. I studied it again, my eyes locking on every shadow, every grain of distortion. The gray figure wasn't just behind me, it was leaning closer, as if whispering something into my ear. I glanced at the clock, 4:21 a.m., 39 minutes until that image became real. Or, maybe it already was. I tried to think logically, but my mind was spiraling. Were these pictures predictions, warnings, or blueprints for something that had to happen? The floor creaked again, closer now. My door handle twitched, just once, as if testing whether it was locked. I didn't remember locking it. My phone was on the nightstand. I grabbed it, hands shaking, and opened the camera app. If something was there, I'd catch it myself. I pointed the lens toward the door. Nothing. Then I flipped to the front camera to check behind me. My stomach dropped. On the screen just over my shoulder was a blurry silhouette, the same tilted head, the same gray outline. I whipped around and the space behind me was empty, but when I looked back at my phone, the figure was closer. I bolted. I didn't stop to put on shoes, didn't care how loud I was being. The hallway felt narrower than it should have been, the walls breathing in and out like lungs. As I passed the kitchen, something caught my eye. A fresh stack of photographs sitting on the counter, neatly arranged like someone had been waiting for me to find them. I didn't want to, but I looked. The first one showed me running down this very hallway. The second showed me stopping to pick up the photos. The third, my front door, open, the night outside yawning black and endless. The fourth showed me stepping out into that darkness. The fifth was blank. The clock on the stove read 4:38 a.m. I dropped the stack. Somewhere far behind me I heard the shutter click again, and this time it was followed by a low, rasping breath. I didn't dare turn around. That breath, wet, ragged, almost curious, still lingered in the air, clinging to my skin like damp fog. My body screamed at me to run, but my legs refused. I swallowed hard and forced myself forward, inching toward the front door. If I could just get outside, maybe I could, outrun something that could be in two places at once? Hide from something that had already seen me before I even moved? The floorboards groaned under my weight, and the sound seemed impossibly loud. 4:46 a.m. The photographs on the kitchen floor lay face down now, though I was sure I'd dropped them face up. One of them had slid toward me, as if pushed. Against my better judgment, I bent to flip it over. It was new. My breath caught. It showed me standing exactly where I was now, but with a pale, long-fingered hand curling around my shoulder. I flung the photo away and bolted for the front door. My fingers wrapped around the handle. It was ice cold, like grabbing a metal pole in winter. I pulled, but the door didn't budge. I twisted the lock. It turned freely, yet the door stayed shut, as though the wood itself was unwilling to let me leave. 53 a.m. Somewhere behind me the floor creaked again, slow, deliberate steps. My eyes darted to the hallway, and in the dim light I saw it, taller than I remembered, its head tilting in short, unnatural jerks as though trying to study me. I backed against the door. My heart was hammering so violently I thought my ribs might crack. 57 a.m. The thing moved closer, each step making the air colder, heavier. Its skin, if it was skin, was the color of wet ash. Its mouth hung slightly open, though no breath escaped now. I couldn't move. 59 a.m. It stopped just a foot away. I could see its eyes, or rather, the places eyes should have been. Hollow. Endless. Then the clock on the wall ticked to 5 o'clock a.m. The sound was deafening, and in that exact instant, it leaned in, pressing its face beside mine, just like in the photograph. I felt something brush my ear. Not breath, not words, but the sensation of being remembered by something you've never met. The camera shutter clicked one final time, and everything went black. I woke up on the couch. The morning light spilling through the blinds was weak and pale, painting the room in washed-out grays. My head throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache, like the echo of a faraway drum. For a moment, I tried to convince myself it had all been a dream. Those photographs, that thing, the cold, the sound of the shutter. But then my eyes drifted to the coffee table. The stack of photographs was still there. I felt sick. The one on top wasn't one I'd seen before. In it, I was lying on this very couch, my eyes closed, and the thing was crouched beside me, its head tilted, face inches from mine. Its fingers, those long gray fingers, were tangled in my hair. I pushed the stack away, nearly knocking it to the floor. My pulse was racing, but I forced myself to look around the room. Everything looked normal. Too normal. The clock on the wall read 7:12 a.m. I staggered to the kitchen to get some water, but when I stepped inside, the smell hit me. Stale, metallic, and faintly sweet, like old blood and rotting fruit. I gagged and covered my mouth. The sink was spotless. The counters were bare, yet the smell seemed to seep from the walls themselves. That's when I noticed the photo taped to the refrigerator door. It was me, standing in the kitchen at this very moment, my hand over my mouth. But there was something wrong. In the photo, my head was turned slightly to the left, as if I were oking at someone just out of frame. And in real life, without thinking, I turned my head. The hallway was dark despite the daylight outside, and deep in that shadow there was movement. Slow, measured, like someone pacing. I stepped back, my heel hitting the edge of the fridge. My mind scrambled for explanations. Sleep paralysis, hallucinations, some kind of prank. But the photographs, they weren't possible. The pacing stopped. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it there, like the air itself had weight. Then, from the dark, a faint sound, one I recognized instantly. The click of a camera shutter, and this time I didn't wait to see the picture. I ran. I yanked the front door open and stumbled outside, barefoot on the cold concrete. The air was strangely still, not a single breeze brushing against my skin. It felt like the whole street was holding its breath. The sun was out, but it was wrong, dim. The kind of light you'd get through a tinted window, flat and lifeless. My neighbors' houses were there, but the colors were drained. Walls, roofs, lawns, all muted shades of gray and beige. And the silence, no cars, no birds, not even the distant hum of traffic. I started down the driveway, glancing around like someone expecting an ambush. Every instinct screamed at me to keep moving, to get anywhere but here. Halfway down the block, I froze. The street ended too soon. Where there should have been another row of houses, the road simply stopped. In its place was a blank white wall stretching up into the hazy sky, smooth and featureless. It didn't look built, it looked placed, like someone had dropped it there just to block my way. I turned to run in the opposite direction, but my stomach dropped. The other end of the street was the same. Another wall, same blinding white, same unnatural height. I wasn't in my neighborhood anymore. I was in something else. I spotted movement from the corner of my eye and spun around. Across the street, a man stood in a front yard. His posture was stiff, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. He was dressed like any other suburban neighbor. Jeans, flannel shirt, but his face was blurred, like it had been smeared in wet paint. I took a step back. He lifted something in his hand. A camera. The flash went off. The next instant, he wasn't there. Panic took over. I sprinted toward the nearest house, pounding on the door, shouting for help. My voice echoed strangely, like I was yelling in a tunnel. The door creaked open. Inside, the hallway was pitch black. No furniture, no light, just an empty corridor stretching far beyond where it should have ended. Somewhere deep in that darkness, I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and accompanied by the faint whir of a camera lens adjusting its focus. I stepped back onto the porch, heart hammering, and looked down at my hands. There was a fresh photograph between my fingers. It showed me standing exactly where I was now, except in the picture, something was standing right behind me. I dropped the photograph like it was burning my skin, but it landed face up on the porch, staring at me. The pale, blurred figure behind me seemed to lean closer in the image, as if it had been moving while the picture was taken. My pulse was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I spun around, desperate to catch whatever had been behind me. The porch was empty, but the street wasn't. They were everywhere now, figures in flannel shirts, jeans, and blurred faces, scattered along the sidewalks, standing in driveways, half hidden behind windows. Each one held a camera, each one aimed it at me. Flash, flash, flash. The light didn't just blind me, it felt like something pulling at me, like tiny hooks digging under my skin. My knees buckled, but I forced myself. Prite. I ran. It didn't matter which direction. Both ends of the street had those impossible walls, but I couldn't just stand there and let them close in. I darted across lawns, through hedges, and over fences. Every time I looked up, there was another figure standing perfectly still, camera raised. The flashes kept coming. I ducked behind a shed in someone's backyard, gasping for breath, the taste of metal thick in my mouth. My hands shook so hard I could barely steady myself. That's when I noticed the photographs. They were scattered across the ground, dozens of them, curling at the edges like they'd been left in the sun too long. Every single one showed me. Some were from today, me walking outside, me looking at the white walls, me standing on the porch. Others were from before. My bedroom, my kitchen, me asleep. Some were from years ago. One was from a birthday party I'd had when I was 10, balloons in the background, my friends crowded around me, and there, at the far edge of the group, just barely in frame, was one of the blurred figures. A twig snapped. I looked up, and one of them stood just a few feet away. The blur where his face should have been seemed to shift, like static crawling across a screen. He raised the camera. This close I could hear it, an awful grinding noise inside the lens, like metal teeth chewing through something that shouldn't be touched. The flash went off, and the world around me changed. The shed, the grass, the sky, they all peeled away like they were just paper. Now I was standing in an endless white space with hundreds of blurred figures circling me, cameras clicking in perfect mechanical rhythm. Somewhere among them, one stepped forward and finally spoke. Smile. The word echoed in the white space, tinny and wrong, like it had been recorded 1,000 times and played back until all the warmth had bled out. I didn't. Couldn't. My mouth was frozen in place, my body locked under the weight of their presence. The blurred figures tightened their circle, cameras clicking in a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat I wasn't supposed to hear. Click, click, click. Every flash burned my vision, but when the spots cleared, the scene around me had shifted slightly. At first, I thought I was imagining it, until I noticed the faces. Not their faces. Mine. Every one of them was wearing a version of my face, stretched and warped, like bad photocopies. Some were too wide, the eyes too far apart, the mouth pulled into an unnatural grin. Others were melting, sliding downward like wax in the sun. But they were all me. "What do you want?" My voice cracked, and it sounded small in the vast, empty place. One of them stepped closer, their outline flickered, as though they weren't standing in one place but in 100 places at once. They held out a photograph. It was me, standing here in this very moment surrounded by them, but the photo wasn't flat. It had depth, movement. My arms in the picture were trembling in the same way they were now. I reached for it without thinking, and the moment my fingers brushed the edge, the photo pulled. It was like being hooked by every nerve ending in my skin. My body lurched forward, but I didn't fall. I was absorbed. For a split second, I was inside the photograph, screaming soundlessly as the scene looped endlessly. Me, surrounded, cameras flashing, no escape. When it spat me back out, I collapsed to the ground. The blurred figure still held the photograph, now thicker, heavier. I realized the image had me inside it. "You're keeping me." The words were barely a whisper. They all froze. And then, all at once, they started lifting their cameras again. I scrambled backward, but no matter which way I turned, I was met with the hollow click of a stab. "Hutter." My voice grew frantic. "Why me? Why—" The figure in front of me finally answered, its voice overlapping with 100 others, like a swarm of insects speaking in unison. "You were seen." Before I could ask what that meant, the circle closed in completely, and every camera fired at once, one blinding explosion of light that swallowed me whole. The light didn't fade. It thinned. It stretched itself into long, pale corridors lined with frames, endless rows of them, receding into a horizon that shouldn't exist indoors. My feet weren't on a floor anymore, but on something soft, like layers of old photographs stacked until they formed a path. Each step crinkled faintly beneath my shoes. I knew, without anyone telling me, that I was inside the gallery. The frames nearest me were silent but not still. Each one held a person, some standing, some crouching, some frozen mid-run. They were trapped mid-breath, eyes wide and pleading, their hands pressed flat against the inside of the glass. I didn't need to hear them to know they were screaming. I turned to leave, but the corridor bent, curving like a lens, forcing me deeper. That's when I noticed the subtle movement in the frames. The people inside weren't statues. They were looping. The same few seconds of their final moments, repeating endlessly. One man kept turning his head as if expecting help that never came. A girl's mouth opened and closed, her hands slamming the glass, only to flicker back to the start, her terror fresh every time. I couldn't look too long at any one face. The longer I stared, the more I could feel them, like static bleeding into my thoughts. Help me, get me out, take my place. The corridor widened suddenly, opening into a vast circular chamber. In the center stood a single, massive frame, and I didn't have to get closer to know who was inside it. Man. The version of me in the frame wasn't moving yet. It just stared outward, eyes locked with mine, expression unreadable. Then it smiled. Slow, deliberate, wrong. My stomach dropped as I realized it was smiling before my face actually did. Something was watching me through that version of myself. "You belong here now." The voice came from behind, and when I turned, the photographer was there, no longer blurred, but wearing my face entirely, flawless and whole, as though they'd been waiting for the right moment to take it. They gestured to the frame. All collections must be complete. I shook my head, backing away, but the frames along the walls started to rattle, their glass vibrating like they were reacting to my refusal. "You can't keep me here," I said, though my voice was barely more than a whisper. The photographer stepped closer, their stolen face split by a grin. "You've already been here longer than you remember." I turned back to the massive frame, only to see my trapped reflection now mimicking my panic perfectly, and then without warning it reached forward from inside the glass. The hand that emerged from the glass wasn't cold or warm. It was flat. It wrapped around my wrist, yet it felt like paper, thin but unbreakable. I jerked backward, but the grip only tightened, pulling with a strength that didn't belong to anything alive. The photographer stood behind me, silent now, head tilted in quiet satisfaction. I tried to tear free, but every movement only dragged me closer to the frame. My shoes scraped across the soft photo path, crumpling it beneath me. When my knee hit the base of the frame, I saw the other me up close. Their eyes were alive, too alive, and they were studying me like I was the final detail in a picture they'd been waiting years to finish. "Let go," I gasped, but my voice came out wrong, hollow, like it was echoing inside the glass already. The photographer leaned in close to my ear. "You'll be remembered forever. Isn't that what everyone wants?" The pulling intensified. My arm slid halfway into the glass, and my skin tingled as though every nerve was being rewritten into stillness. My trapped self smiled wider, teeth too bright, too sharp in the flickering light. Behind me, the corridor frames began to shake violently. Some of the trapped figures slammed harder, desperate to escape. Others simply stared at me with relief, like they were glad someone else was about to take the focus. My reflection yanked again, and my chest hit the glass. For a split second, the world inside the frame unfolded before me. It wasn't just a frozen image, it was an entire place. Endless rows of strangers stood in the dark, lit only by occasional camera flashes in the distance. All of them were perfectly still, like mannequins, until I made eye contact and saw the flicker of trapped, desperate life in their eyes. I screamed and pushed back, but my legs slid forward like the ground was tilting beneath me. My reflection placed its other hand on my shoulder. I felt a second me inside the glass gripping from the other side. The photographer's voice was almost tender. "Hold still." With one final pull, the glass rippled like water, and I was inside. The sound cut off instantly. No footsteps, no breathing. Only the faint hum of eternity pressing in on all sides. I turned to where the glass had been, but now there was only the photographer, outside, adjusting their camera and snapping a shot. My body on the other side blinked, smiled, and stepped away from the frame. They wore my movements perfectly. From the outside, no one would ever cue. Now I was gone. And deep in the silent gallery, surrounded by 1,000 other eyes, I waited for my turn to smile when the next flash came. The first thing I noticed that night was how unnatural the air felt. It wasn't just cold, it was still. Not a single leaf rustled outside, not a distant hum of a car passing by. Even the usual ticking of my wall clock seemed to have grown quieter, like time itself was holding its breath. I sat at my desk pretending to read, but my eyes kept darting toward the hallway. It had been weeks since the last incident, and part of me had convinced myself it was over, that maybe whatever was haunting me had moved on, found a new victim, or simply gotten bored. But deep down, I knew better. They don't leave, they wait. I tried to distract myself, scrolling endlessly through my phone, when the house suddenly creaked. Just once. Normally, old wood expands and contracts with the temperature, but this felt deliberate, like something was testing the sound of its own footsteps. A wave of unease washed over me, and I pushed my chair back. I moved slowly toward the hallway, telling myself it was just the pipes or the wind. But as I stepped out of my room, I realized something horrifying. Every shadow was in the wrong place. The light from the street lamp outside was still shining through the curtains, but instead of casting soft, natural shadows, they looked stretched, distorted, like they were reaching for me. That's when I heard it. A faint whisper. Not from my room, not from outside, but above me. I froze and tilted my head toward the ceiling. The sound wasn't words, it was the soft, airy hiss of breath, slow and deliberate. My skin prickled. There was nothing above my bedroom except the attic, and the attic had been locked since I moved in. Without thinking, I reached for the light switch, but my fingers touched cold metal that shouldn't have been there. A chain. I didn't own a pull-chain light. My heart began to pound. The chain trembled slightly as if someone had just let go. And then from the attic, I heard the slow, agonizing sound of something being dragged. That's when I knew. Whatever had been waiting had decided tonight was the night to come closer. The dragging sound grew louder, vibrating through the ceiling like nails scratching against old wood. My first instinct was to run, but my legs felt anchored in place, as if the floor beneath me had thickened into tar. Every creak above seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat. I forced myself to move backward toward my bedroom, thinking maybe I could lock the door and call someone. But halfway there, a sudden thump shook the ceiling, directly above me. Dust rained down, tiny particles drifting through the dim light like falling ash. The chain I had felt earlier swayed again, this time without me touching it. The faint metallic clink echoed unnaturally loud in the silence. My breath quickened and I realized I'd been holding it for too long. The air felt heavier, like I was breathing through wet cloth. The dragging sound stopped. For a moment I thought maybe it was over, that whatever was up there had decided to retreat. Then, with no warning, something scraped violently against the inside of the attic hatch. My eyes shot upward, and I saw it. 3 long, thin fingers pushing through the narrow seam where the wood met the frame. They were too pale, almost translucent, with joints bent at angles no human hand should have. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on the carpet, nearly sending me to the floor. The fingers twitched, curling like they were testing the air. Then they withdrew, and the hatch creaked. My heart sank. It wasn't opening, it was breathing. I could hear it now, slow, deep, rhythmic breaths, and with each exhale the smell of damp earth and something metallic filled the hallway. Blood, I was sure of it. In a surge of panic I bolted toward the front door. My hand gripped the knob, twisting hard, locked. I fumbled with it, swearing under my breath, but it wouldn't turn, as if the mechanism itself had fused shut. Behind me the hatch gave a low, groaning sound like ancient hinges moving for the first time in years. I didn't have to look to know it was opening. That's when a soft voice, one that sounded eerily like my own, whispered from above, "Don't leave. You've been gone long enough." My skin went cold. It didn't want to kill me yet. It wanted me to stay. The attic hatch creaked open slowly, revealing nothing but blackness. My eyes strained against the darkness, searching for any sign of movement. Then a shape emerged, long and thin, impossibly pale. The fingers I'd seen earlier stretched downward, followed by a gaunt arm, then a twisted shoulder. It moved with an unnatural grace, as if sliding through water, soundless except for the soft scrape of nails against wood. The thing wasn't human, but it wore a face. Mine, or rather, a warped, cracked version of it. I wanted to scream, but my throat had gone dry. My body trembled as it stepped fully into the dim light, eyes hollow yet somehow burning with recognition. It smiled, but it wasn't joy, it was hunger. "I've waited," it whispered in that familiar voice, "for you to remember." The silence after those words was heavier than any noise. I could feel the weight of years pressing down, the memories I'd tried to bury flooding back with sharp edges, fear, confusion, regret. I wanted to run, but I was rooted to the spot, trapped by the presence of something both so alien and so intimately connected to me. It was the embodiment of all the things I'd tried to forget, the shadows lurking just beyond the edges of my mind. "Why?" I finally managed to ask, voice barely above a breath. It tilted its head, eyes flickering. "Because you belong here. Because you never truly left." As the room seemed to shrink around me, I realized that this wasn't just a haunting, it was a reckoning, a mirror held up to every dark corner of my past. And the thing with my face wasn't going away. Not until I faced what I'd been running from all along. I could feel the cold breath of that thing against my skin, my face, but it wasn't breathing. It was waiting for me to break, to give in. My knees buckled. Everything inside me screamed to run, but the hallway felt like quicksand, dragging me down. I stumbled, caught myself, and looked up into those hollow eyes, empty, yet unbearably knowing. "I'm not afraid," I whispered, though my voice cracked like dry wood. It laughed, a sound like glass shattering and distant thunder rolled into one. "You will be." Then, slowly, impossibly, it lifted its hand and traced the outline of my face with those thin, fragile fingers. The touch was ice and fire all at once, burning through memories I didn't want to remember. I wanted to scream, but the sound got caught somewhere deep in my chest. "You thought you could hide," it said, voice softer now, almost sorrowful. "But the collection, the photographs, they're all pieces of you. Pieces I keep safe." Safe. The word tasted bitter. I wanted to argue, to fight back, but my limbs refused to obey. I realized then that the thing wasn't just a ghost or a monster. It was part of me, the shadow I'd never faced, the fragment I'd locked away. The walls around us began to ripple, like water disturbed by a stone. The hallway dissolved into a gallery of photos, the ones I'd seen before, the ones I'd become part of. Each frame glowed faintly, and inside each one, a trapped face stared back. "Smile," it whispered again, and this time I understood. To be remembered was to be trapped. To be seen forever was to lose yourself piece by piece. I closed my eyes, took a breath, and smiled. The flash was blinding. When the light faded, I was no longer alone. Inside the glass, I was just another frozen face, waiting for the next flash, the next visitor, the next story. And outside, the world kept turning, unaware that I'd ever existed at all.